The View never saw this coming. For weeks, they mocked the lawsuit, downplayed it on air, and even tried to ignore it completely. They thought it was just another political stunt. But behind closed doors, panic was setting in. This wasn't just about a television scandal anymore. Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit had transformed from a legal battle into a corporate nightmare, one that threatened to expose something much bigger, much darker, and far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. At first, ABC executives treated it like just another political skirmish, another attempt by a conservative firebrand to take down a mainstream media powerhouse. They had dealt with controversies before. They had connections, influence, and control over the narrative. But this time, something changed. Files started leaking, emails, documents, internal memos, and suddenly, it wasn't just a View that had a problem. ABC had a full-blown corporate crisis, because these weren't just any emails. They revealed something far more explosive, a direct line of communication between the View's producers, top executives at ABC, and powerful political figures. The kind of backdoor deals and media manipulation that weren't supposed to see the light of day. And now, Karoline's lawsuit was the least of their concerns. This was no longer just about one conservative woman fighting back. This was about the hidden power structures behind the scenes, the quiet favors, the coordinated narratives, the deals made in secret between politicians, media moguls, and corporate giants. And the worst part? The View's hosts had no idea how deep this went. They thought they were fighting a public relations battle. They didn't realize they were caught in the middle of a corporate war. Before we go any further, if you're hooked on this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. Even the View's loyal fans were starting to question everything. What really happened behind the scenes? Why were Whoopi, Joy, and the rest of the hosts suddenly panicking? And most importantly, who else was implicated in this mess? Because this wasn't just about Karoline anymore. This could be the scandal that finally brings down the View and the entire system that has protected it for years. At first, the View acted like the lawsuit was a joke. The hosts laughed it off, mocking Karoline Leavitt on air, acting as if she was just looking for attention. Joy Behar rolled her eyes. Oh, please, another conservative playing victim. Whoopi Goldberg shrugged, smirking. We've been through worse. This will be forgotten in a week. Sunny Hostin, the show's resident legal expert, confidently dismissed the case. This is just another frivolous lawsuit. Legally speaking, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. And for a moment, it seemed like their strategy was working. The mainstream media backed them up, treating the lawsuit as nothing more than a publicity stunt. CNN ran a segment ridiculing Karoline, labeling her as just another right-wing opportunist. MSNBC's legal analysts confidently predicted that the case wouldn't hold up in court. The message was clear. Karoline didn't have a chance. Or at least, that's what they thought. What none of them realized, what they couldn't have known, was that something far bigger was about to unfold. Because while the View was laughing, the walls around them were already crumbling. What started as a simple lawsuit was about to turn into something far more explosive. Behind the scenes, someone was talking, and not just talking, leaking. At first, it was subtle. A handful of emails, a few questionable financial transactions, vague references to media executives and political consultants, the kind of conversations that weren't meant to leave the boardroom. Most networks would have buried it. Most journalists would have looked the other way. But this time, something was different. Because those whispers, those minor leaks that ABC's legal team thought they could control, soon turned into something much more dangerous. At first, it was a few independent reporters, writers from smaller outlets who weren't afraid to ask real questions. Then, bigger names started noticing. Real journalists. Not the mainstream media allies who had spent years protecting the View. They started digging, cross-referencing sources, tracing money trails, following digital breadcrumbs that led to something far bigger than just a lawsuit. Anonymous sources started coming forward. At first, they hesitated. Some were ABC employees, low-level staff who had overheard conversations in hallways. Some were former producers, people who had left the View but knew too much. And some were still inside, people with access, people who had seen the memos, people who knew exactly. ABC's legal team wasn't laughing anymore. At first, they thought they were just dealing with a defamation case. A problem, sure, but a manageable one. They had fought off lawsuits before, and with their resources, they figured they could drag it out until it disappeared. But then they started digging, and what they found sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the network. This wasn't just about The View. Karoline's legal team had more than just testimonies and workplace misconduct claims. They had a paper trail, internal communications, memos, encrypted emails that were never supposed to see the light of day. And the worst part? These documents didn't just involve The View's producers and hosts. They connected ABC executives to key political figures. There were references to secret meetings between network leadership and high-ranking government officials, discussions about narrative control, about which stories should be buried, and about which people should be silenced. The FBI had already seen the emails, and they weren't just investigating anymore. They were preparing for action. Then came the moment Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar finally found out. It wasn't some slow realization. It wasn't a calculated discussion in a boardroom. It was an explosion. Are you kidding me? We're actually taking her seriously now. Whoopi's voice shook the executive office walls. ABC's legal team tried to calm her down. They told her they were just weighing options, that no decision had been made. But it was too late. Joy Behar slammed her makeup case onto the table, cracking the mirror. We're not giving her a damn dime. They thought they had built this show. They thought they were untouchable. And now, ABC was considering negotiations behind their backs. That meant one thing. They weren't just losing control of the lawsuit. They were losing control of everything. And for the first time in The View's history, they were terrified. Outside of The View studios, the backlash only grew stronger. Social media was relentless. People weren't just mocking the hosts anymore. They were demanding accountability. At first, ABC's damage control team scrambled to contain the situation. They pushed friendly media outlets to run softer stories, defending the show. But it wasn't working. Fox News dedicated entire segments to the desperation at ABC, airing side-by-side clips of Whoopi and Joy mocking Karoline weeks earlier, followed by their panic reactions now. The Daily Wire ran an editorial titled, "The View is panicking because they know what's coming." Even independent content creators, YouTubers, and podcasters joined in, tearing apart The View's hypocrisy piece by piece. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. A viral meme, a split-screen image. On one side, Whoopi Goldberg laughing on The View, mocking Karoline. On the other, Whoopi Goldberg panicked on air, flustered and defensive. The caption? "It's all fun and games until the lawsuit is real." It spread like wildfire. And then things got even worse. Because this wasn't just an online firestorm anymore. Now, ABC's advertisers were pulling out. Big brands that had supported The View for years started distancing themselves. At first, it was subtle. Fewer commercial placements, less sponsorship coverage. Then it became obvious. One by one, companies quietly severed ties. And for a network like ABC, this wasn't just embarrassing. It was a financial disaster. Inside ABC's executive offices, the discussions took a radical turn. For the first time in The View's history, network leaders were asking a question they never thought possible. Is it worth keeping the show on the air? They had weathered scandals before. They had survived controversies. But this was different. This wasn't just bad PR. This was potential legal consequences, federal investigations, and now, financial instability. And so, the unthinkable happened. ABC's board members met behind closed doors to discuss a last resort option, canceling The View altogether. It seemed impossible. The show had been a cornerstone of daytime television for years. But the numbers didn't lie. Ratings were plummeting. Advertisers were fleeing. And worst of all, the lawsuit wasn't going away. Inside The View studios, the panic was uncontrollable. Whoopi Goldberg was furious, demanding to know, why aren't we fighting back harder? Joy Behar was devastated, realizing that her career, her entire legacy, could end in disgrace. Sunny Hostin, once confident that the lawsuit was no threat at all, now refused to comment publicly. And in the midst of all this chaos, Karoline Leavitt said nothing. She didn't need to, because she had already won. Inside ABC's executive offices, the tension was unbearable. The lawsuit wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a financial and legal disaster. For the first time in the network's history, executives were asking a question they never thought they'd have to consider. Is it worth keeping The View on the air? The show had been a cornerstone of daytime television for decades. But the numbers didn't lie. Ratings were free-falling. Advertisers were pulling out. Viewers were turning against them. And worst of all, the lawsuit wasn't going away. ABC's board members met behind closed doors for an emergency meeting. They had survived scandals before. They had weathered controversies. But this was a direct threat, not just to The View, but to the entire network's credibility. And so, the unthinkable happened. A serious discussion began about a last resort option, canceling The View altogether. It wasn't just about bad PR anymore. It was about the legal risk, the federal investigations, and the rapid collapse of advertiser trust. Inside The View studios, the panic was uncontrollable. Whoopi Goldberg was livid, storming into a meeting with producers. Why aren't we fighting back harder? Joy Behar, usually the one making jokes at other people's expense, sat quietly, shaking her head. For the first time, she understood this might be the end. Sunny Hostin, once so confident that the lawsuit was a joke, now refused to comment publicly. And in the midst of all this chaos, Karoline Leavitt said nothing. She didn't have to, because she had already won. For 48 hours, ABC executives scrambled behind the scenes, trying to contain the disaster that was now spiraling out of their control. They held emergency meetings, their calls filled with urgent voices and panicked whispers. Damage control strategies were proposed, revised, and abandoned in real time. PR teams worked overtime, drafting and redrafting statements that were never released because there were no words that could make the situation disappear. They sent desperate emails to their remaining sponsors, pleading with them not to jump ship. They made phone calls at all hours, promising that the situation was under control, that The View was still a valuable platform. But the corporate world wasn't buying it. The advertisers weren't listening anymore. They turned to their allies in the media, pulling every favor they could. They pleaded for softer coverage, begged for distraction stories, urged reporters to change the narrative. But even the most friendly outlets hesitated. This wasn't just another PR problem. This was something bigger. And no matter how many strings they pulled, how many headlines they tried to rewrite, how many legal threats they whispered behind closed doors, nothing was working. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Karoline Leavitt finally broke her silence. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't go on Fox News. She didn't stand in front of cameras or deliver a prepared speech. She didn't have to. Instead, she posted just 5 words on social media. This is only the beginning. That was it. No explanation. No press statement. No further details. But that one sentence was enough. Within minutes, the post exploded across the internet. Conservative commentators immediately rallied behind her, amplifying her message. Podcasters, political influencers, and independent media voices dissected her words, speculating about what was coming next. News outlets had no choice but to cover it. And ABC was now spiraling deeper into crisis mode. Inside The View studios, the atmosphere was like a funeral. There were no witty remarks, no sarcastic jabs at Karoline, no laughing off the lawsuit, because for the first time in their careers, they were the ones on the defensive. They were the ones being exposed. They were the ones begging for mercy. And Karoline, she wasn't letting go, because now she wasn't just suing The View. She was suing the entire system that had protected them for years. And this time, there was no escape. This wasn't just another TV controversy. This was the moment everything changed. For years, The View had mocked, ridiculed, and dismissed anyone who didn't fit their narrative. They had laughed at their critics. They had shut down opposing voices. They had controlled the conversation. But now, they were the story. And no amount of media spin could change that. ABC had one final meeting, hoping to find a way out. But there was none. The network had a choice to make: fight a lawsuit they were destined to lose, or cut their losses and walk away. And for the first time in history, they were seriously considering the latter. The View, once untouchable, was hanging by a thread. And Karoline Leavitt? She had just sent a message to every major media outlet in the country. You don't control the narrative anymore.